She was only 16, a brilliant scholar with royal blood who just wanted a quiet life with her books. She never asked to be a queen. But in the cutthroat world of Tudor England, her fate was never going to be her own. Against her will, she was shoved onto the throne and hailed as the Queen of England. Just 9 days later, she was a prisoner in the Tower of London, convicted of treason. Her execution would horrify the kingdom and create a legend that has lasted for centuries, the story of the girl who was queen for only 9 days and paid the ultimate price for a crown she never wanted. To understand the tragedy of Lady Jane Grey, you have to go back to the heart of the 16th century, a time of religious and political chaos in England. The kingdom was on a knife's edge. King Henry VIII had ripped the nation away from the Catholic Church, a move that plunged England into decades of turmoil. His son, the young King Edward VI, was a passionate Protestant, but his health was failing fast, and he had no children to inherit his throne. According to Henry VIII's own will, the crown was supposed to pass to his daughters, first Mary, then Elizabeth. The problem was, in the eyes of the powerful men running the country, Mary was a devout Catholic. If she took the throne, it would mean a return to Rome, a complete undoing of the English Reformation, and a likely end to the careers, and even the lives, of the Protestant nobles who had thrived under Edward. At the center of this crisis was a young woman who, until then, had lived her life far from the venomous politics of the court. Lady Jane Grey was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII, putting her right in the royal line of succession. Born in 1537, she was a Tudor by blood, if not by name. And by all accounts, she was extraordinary. While other girls her age focused on courtly life, Jane's world was one of books and ideas. She received a stellar humanist education, becoming fluent in Latin and Greek, and was even studying Hebrew, all while corresponding with the great scholarly minds of Europe. She was quiet, deeply religious, and intensely intelligent, a young woman who preferred the company of books to the spectacle of the court. But the very things that made her remarkable, her Protestant faith and her royal blood, also made her a target. They would turn her from a scholar into a pawn in the most dangerous game of all. Jane's early life was shaped by powerful, ambitious people. For a time, she lived with Queen Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow, a kind and educated woman who nurtured Jane's Protestant faith and her love of learning. This period, living alongside her cousin Princess Elizabeth, was probably a happy one. But the world around her was anything but stable. Catherine Parr's new husband, Thomas Seymour, was executed for treason, a brutal reminder of Tudor politics. Jane, only about 11, was sent back to her parents' home. Her parents, Henry Grey and Frances Brandon, were high-ranking nobles, but they were also known for their ambition and their harsh treatment of their daughter. Jane herself later complained of being cruelly threatened and bullied, finding her only escape in her lessons. She was a valuable asset, a girl with royal blood who could be married off to secure power. And the most powerful man in England had taken notice. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was the man effectively running England during King Edward VI's youth. He was cunning, ruthless, and desperate to hold on to power. As the king's health worsened from tuberculosis in early 1553, Northumberland saw his time running out. If the Catholic Mary took the throne, his Protestant government was finished. He would lose everything. So he devised a daring, treasonous plan. He would ignore Henry VIII's will. He would bypass both Mary and Elizabeth. He would convince the dying king to name a new successor, one who would keep Protestantism, and the Dudley family, in power. His chosen candidate was the unsuspecting Lady Jane Grey. To lock in his plan, Northumberland moved fast. On May 25, 1553, he married his youngest son, Guilford Dudley, to Jane. She was 16, her husband about 18. It wasn't a love match, it was a political power play. John Dudley now had a direct family link to his chosen heir. He then went to work on the dying king. He played on Edward's deep Protestant faith and his fears of what his Catholic sister Mary would do. He persuaded the 15-year-old to draft a new will, his device for the succession. In it, Edward cut out his own sisters, declaring them illegitimate, and named his cousin, the Lady Jane and her heirs male, as his successor. After pressuring the Privy Council to sign it, the trap was set. Lady Jane Grey, the scholar who just wanted a quiet life, was now at the center of a plot to steal the throne of England. She had no idea what was about to hit her. On July 6, 1553, King Edward VI died at just 15 years old. For 4 agonizing days, his death was kept secret. This was John Dudley's chance to secure his coup. He had to capture Mary Tudor before she could rally support. But Mary was no fool. Sensing the plot, she fled her estate and rode hard for East Anglia, a region where she had powerful allies. On the afternoon of July 9, Jane was summoned to Sion House on the banks of the Thames. There, before an assembly of the kingdom's most powerful men, John Dudley knelt before her. He told her the king was dead and that his final will named her the new Queen of England. Their announcement didn't get the reaction they wanted. Instead of triumph, Jane collapsed. When she recovered, she wept, protesting that the crown wasn't hers to take, that it belonged to Lady Mary. According to her own later accounts, she argued and pleaded, but the pressure was immense. They told her it was her duty, God's will, the late king's final command. Reluctantly, tearfully, the 16-year-old girl accepted the crown she never wanted. The very next day, July 10, 1553, she was taken in a royal procession to the Tower of London to await her coronation, as was tradition. She was proclaimed Queen Jane. But the public's reaction was quiet. There was no cheering in the streets. The people of London were uneasy. They knew Mary was the rightful heir, and legitimacy meant everything to them. Inside the tower, Jane quickly proved she was not the puppet her father-in-law had hoped for. When Dudley expected her to name his son, her husband Guilford, as king, she flatly refused. The law, she argued, didn't allow a queen to make a king. She would make him a duke, nothing more. The decision caused a massive fight with Guilford and his mother, but Jane held her ground. Meanwhile, outside the tower walls, Dudley's whole plan was unraveling. Mary Tudor was proving to be a formidable opponent. From East Anglia, she proclaimed herself the true queen and started gathering a massive army. Nobles and commoners flocked to her side, not just out of Catholic loyalty, but because they believed she was the legitimate heir being cheated by a power-hungry nobleman. Dudley was widely hated, and his connection to Jane was poisoning her cause. Facing a full-blown rebellion, Dudley had to ride out and confront Mary's forces. On July 14, he left London at the head of an army, promising his daughter-in-law he would return victorious. As he rode through the silent streets, he reportedly muttered to a friend, "The people press to see us, but not one saith Godspeed us." He was right to be worried. The moment he left the city, his support collapsed. With John Dudley gone, the Privy Council saw its chance. These men had backed Jane out of fear and ambition, not loyalty. Seeing the tide turn so decisively toward Mary, they scrambled to save their own skins. On July 19, 1553, just 9 days after proclaiming Jane queen, the very same men rode into the city and proclaimed Mary the rightful Queen of England. The city exploded in celebration. Bells rang, bonfires were lit, and people partied in the streets, a stark contrast to the silence that had greeted Jane's proclamation. Back in the Tower, Jane's brief, unhappy reign came to a shocking end. Her own father, the Duke of Suffolk, came to her and gently told her she was no longer queen. Relieved, the young girl who had never wanted the crown asked the simple question, "Can I go home now?" But she couldn't go home. The Tower of London, her palace for 9 days, was now her prison. She and her husband Guilford were separated and confined. Her attendants abandoned her. She was alone, a 16-year-old girl caught in the wreckage of a failed coup. John Dudley's army had deserted him. He was arrested, dragged back to London as a traitor, and on August 22, he was executed on Tower Hill. At first, it seemed Queen Mary might show mercy, especially to her young cousin. Mary, more than anyone, knew what it was like to be used as a pawn by powerful men. She seemed to believe Jane was mostly innocent. For a time, Jane was held in relatively comfortable quarters, and many thought she would be pardoned. But the wheels of the state are relentless. On November 13, 1553, Jane and her husband were put on trial for high treason. Dressed in a simple black gown, Jane conducted herself with quiet dignity. The charge was undeniable: she had illegally taken the throne. They all pleaded guilty. The sentence was horrific: Jane was to be burned alive on Tower Hill or beheaded as the Queen pleases. Even then, Mary hesitated to sign the death warrant. Jane and Guildford were sent back to the Tower, their lives hanging by a thread. It seemed possible that Mary's instinct for mercy would win out. But Tudor politics had one last, cruel twist in store for Lady Jane Grey. The event that sealed Jane's fate was a rebellion she had nothing to do with. In January 1554, a revolt known as Wyatt's Rebellion erupted. It was a protest against Queen Mary's unpopular plan to marry Prince Philip of Spain. The fatal blow for Jane came when one of the key conspirators joined the cause: her own father, Henry Grey. He had already been pardoned for the summer's coup, but his terrible judgment led him straight into another treasonous plot. His involvement was a disaster for Jane. Even though she was locked away, her father's actions made her a massive threat to Mary's throne. As long as Jane lived, she would be a living symbol for Protestant rebels to rally around. The rebellion was crushed, but the damage was done. Mary's advisors, likely with a nudge from the Spanish, insisted that she could never be secure while Jane was alive. With a heavy heart, Queen Mary signed the death warrant. In a final attempt to save Jane's soul, Mary sent her chaplain, John Feckenham, to persuade her to convert to Catholicism. For 3 days, the learned abbot and the teenage girl engaged in a sophisticated theological debate. Jane, articulate and steadfast, politely refused to abandon her faith. The night before her execution, her husband Guildford asked to see her one last time. Jane gently refused, saying it would only increase their misery and pain, and that they would soon meet elsewhere. On the morning of February 12, 1554, Jane stood at her window and watched as a cart carried the headless body of her husband back into the Tower after his public execution. Her own death was to be a private affair on Tower Green, a small mercy for her royal blood. She walked to the scaffold with unnerving calm, a prayer book in her hands. In her final speech, she admitted her act of accepting the crown was unlawful, but she was clear about one thing. "Touching the procurement and desire thereof by me or on my behalf," she declared, "I do wash my hands thereof in innocency." She then affirmed her Protestant faith and knelt to recite a psalm. She gave her gloves and handkerchief to a weeping lady-in-waiting. When the executioner asked for her forgiveness, as was custom, she gave it most willingly. Then, a moment of heart-stopping pathos. As she was blindfolded, she momentarily panicked, fumbling for the block. "What shall I do? Where is it?" she cried out. An onlooker guided her hands. She laid her head down and spoke her final words, the same as Christ on the cross: "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." With a single strike of the axe, it was over. She was 16, perhaps 17, years old. The execution of a teenage girl, an intelligent and pious young woman who was clearly a victim of others' ambitions, sent a ripple of horror through the country. Her story quickly grew into a legend, cementing her image as a Protestant martyr. Her legacy is one of innocence caught in the crossfire of dynastic ambition and religious fanaticism. She is the 9 Days Queen, a name that perfectly captures the dizzying speed of her rise and the profound tragedy of her fall. Her life is a haunting reminder of how, in the merciless game of power, the most vulnerable are so often the first to be sacrificed. If you found this story as compelling as we do, please like this video and subscribe for more tales from the dramatic pages of history. Let us know in the comments which historical figure you'd like us to cover next. Thanks for watching.